Disabled People, Independent Living and Covid-19. This film has been produced by the People's History Museum's Nothing About Us Without Us project. Here is a colourful image of a banner with the title, Disabled People Fight Back. The words equality and nothing about us without us in large letters frame an embroidered scene showing a mix of disabled people protesting with placards and banners, including one saying, "Society makes people disabled," and "Powerlessness equals pain." We're going to look at what independence and independent living means for disabled people and tell you a little about the history of independent living in the UK. We're also going to hear from some disabled people about what independence means to them and how COVID-19 has had an effect on their lives. Most people think of being independent as doing things for ourselves, no matter how easy or difficult it is. But no one is independent in this way. Let's have a think about it. Do we make our own electricity? Do we grow our own food? Most of us don't. Over the past 40 years or so, many disabled people have shared our experiences with each other and talked about what independence means. We came to the conclusion that it's being able to control our own lives and make our own choices. For example, making a meal by using an adapted piece of equipment or by telling someone else, such as a personal assistant, what to cook and how to cook it is being independent. The choice of what to eat and how it is cooked is the same as for someone else who doesn't use this assistance. Disabled people have developed a list known as the 7 Needs of Independent Living. It varies which are important to each disabled person, but all must be in place. These are information. To be able to make choices, we all need to know what we can choose between. We need information in a way that we can easily use it. Some examples of ways to give information other than a website leaflet in small print are in audio, braille, by British Sign Language, in large print, in symbols, or by being explained to us by a person. Peer support. This is an odd phrase that sounds like it could be complicated, but it isn't. It simply means getting support from other disabled people, giving us a chance to share knowledge and experience with each other that's useful and reaffirming. Accessible housing. Housing is a basic need for everyone. For disabled people, our housing needs to suit us, that is, be accessible to us. Accessible housing means that it suits our needs. For example, level access or wider doors, calming or contrasting colours, being close to our support networks, transport links or shops. Equipment or aids and adaptations. Sometimes equipment or adaptations are useful to make a place or certain tasks accessible or possible. Some examples of adaptations or equipment are grab rails in the bathroom, a doorbell or smoke alarm that has a flashing light, a wheelchair, a white cane, even things which seem quite ordinary now, like a mobile phone or tablet speaking what is on the screen, or noise-cancelling headphones, wet rooms and walk-in showers. Personal assistance. Often equipment is not the answer, so many disabled people employ someone to assist us. We call these personal assistants. Employing someone means we are in control of how and when the assistance is given, coming back again to having choice and control. If we are relying on help from friends and family, we are not in control of it and cannot always choose how and when the help is given. It takes away our autonomy. Accessible transport. Disabled people need to travel to places such as work, shops, leisure centres and on holiday. For this to be possible, buses, coaches, trains, trams, aeroplanes, taxis and cars need to be designed or adaptable so that disabled people can use them as easily as non-disabled people. Accessible environment. The environment around us needs to be designed in a way that does not exclude disabled people. That includes roads, paths, buildings, parks, theatres, schools, colleges, train stations, airports, shops, basically everywhere. Some examples you will know of are the tactile bumps at road crossings, slopes instead of curbs, level entrances into buildings, wider doors, lifts and ramps. Others you may not think of straight away are avoiding the use of bright-coloured electronic screens and background music and having different kinds of chairs for people to choose from. There is more to an accessible environment than this. A willingness to communicate with people in the way that suits them best is important. This may be by speaking to them clearly, using appropriate language, whether British Sign Language, plain English or other. Even if the environment is made fully accessible, negative attitudes such as discrimination and prejudice affect disabled people. While the impact of people's actions and decisions on disabled people are not considered, and while there are still negative attitudes, true inclusion of and independence for disabled people will not happen. We will still not have the same level of choice and control over our lives as non-disabled people. A brief history of independent living in the UK. So now let's look back in time. Until the 1980s, many disabled people had little, if any, choice about where or how we lived. For disabled people who needed support but did not have the money to pay for it, the options were either to live in the family home, which more often than not wasn't accessible, being given support from family as and when they could spare time, or live in a hospital or residential institution. For many disabled people, there was no choice. They had to live in a residential institution. In the mid-1960s, a national campaign for the young chronically sick began to promote the need for an alternative to living in hospital or relying on the support of family. The group provided evidence for the bill MP Alf Morris was promoting, which became the Chronically Sick and Disabled Persons Act 1970. Here is an image of a pamphlet with the words, "Pamphlet from Alf Morris's Chronically Sick and Disabled Persons Act, analysed for you by David Weitzman QC MP, with a foreword by the Right Honourable Howard Wilson OBE MP. Introduction by Alf Morris MP. Price 1S 6D. Post fee." At the top are two black and white cartoons. One titled, "Now This," has a wheelchair user in a room surrounded by people, some look like children. The second, titled, "Not This," has two people in what look like hospital beds. Here is a picture of Pamela Lafane, a prominent activist in the group. After years of fighting the rigid hospital regime, Pamela became a journalist from her hospital bed, in particular, having an article published in the Guardian newspaper in 1966. Here is a black and white posed photograph of disabled activist Pamela Lafane smiling at the camera with landscape paintings on a wooden fence behind her. At the same time, in the 1960s, a movement began promoting independent living at the University of California, Berkeley. This led to the first Centre for Independent Living being set up in 1972, which disabled people from the UK would later gain knowledge and encouragement from. In the 1970s, small groups of disabled people around the UK started looking at how they could leave residential institutions to live in their own home. In 1976, a group of disabled people in Derbyshire, including Maggie and Ken Davies, successfully negotiated with the Housing Association for a purpose-built property with 3 ground floor flats for disabled people and 2 first floor flats for non-disabled people. Here is a black and white photograph of Maggie and Ken Davies at home. Both are laughing. A black-haired dog is on Maggie's lap, looking like he's posing for the camera. It was a unique arrangement with non-disabled tenants supporting the disabled tenants as part of the tenancy agreement, also receiving a small payment for this support from the disabled people's benefits. It became clear over time that the arrangement was not always satisfactory, but it was a breakthrough in establishing a means for disabled people to leave residential institutions. Here is a colour photograph of Grove Road from 1976. It is a large brick-built building with many windows, a small lawn and tarmac driveway in front. In 1979, another scheme called Project 81 began with a group of people living in the Lee Court, Leonard Cheshire residential home in Hampshire. Negotiations with the local authorities paying for their places in Lee Court took 3 years. Then it was finally agreed to give them the money to employ their own personal assistants so they could move out. Here is a black and white photograph of John Evans, a founding member of Project 81. In the photo, John is staring directly at the camera. He has dark-coloured hair and a beard. This photograph was taken in 1981. It is hard to show in a few words the significance of these two schemes. Disabled people had to battle with a paternalistic attitude towards us and to change a whole mindset of thinking about how disabled people could and should live. In the early 1980s, a group of disabled people, including some from both these schemes, travelled to Berkeley to find out about their Centre for Independent Living. They brought back the principles of independent living and the idea that disabled people ourselves should run our own support services. In 1984, both Derbyshire Centre for Independent Living and Hampshire Centre for Independent Living were set up, partly by people from Grove Road and Project 81. They were run and controlled by disabled people and supported all disabled people irrespective of age, background, ethnicity, gender, impairment or sexuality. The two CILs grew differently. This is a black and white photograph from a British Council of Organisations of Disabled People demonstration in 1998. A group of disabled people carrying a banner with HCIL on it. Banner and placards. One of the placards has the words, HCIL says rights not charity written on it. Hampshire CIL produced the first sourcebook on independent living, a video, newsletters, and focused on promoting personal assistance and direct payments. This is the money given to disabled people to employ their own personal assistant. This is an image of the front page of the Hampshire Centre for Independent Living sourcebook towards independent living with the words, Sourcebook towards independent living, care support ideas. It is printed on green paper with black text. More on the lines of US centres, Derbyshire CIL supported disabled people with information, peer support, housing, personal assistance, aids and adaptations, transport and environmental access. These became known as the Derbyshire 7 Basic Needs and have continued to be used as a basis over the years by CILs and disabled people's organisations. The 1980s started a rollercoaster ride for independent living. A few local authorities created independent living schemes with indirect payments. This worked by the local authority channeling the money through a third party, such as a housing association or a disabled people's organisation, which would then pass it on to the disabled person so they could employ personal assistants. A second temporary improvement was a new benefit called domestic care allowance, introduced in 1984. Disabled people began to use this to pay for the support they needed. Unfortunately, in 1986, the benefit was withdrawn. This led to an outcry by disabled people who were beginning to get used to having more choice and control over their lives. Another blow in 1986 was a threat to the indirect payment schemes. The county treasurer and solicitor in Hampshire decided their scheme was illegal. Fortunately, at the same time, the commission, which audits the work of local authorities, praised the scheme and questioned why it was illegal, so it had a reprieve. The next milestone on the road to independent living was in 1988, when after much campaigning and lobbying by disabled people, the Independent Living Fund was set up. This money that disabled people could apply for to employ personal assistants came from central government. It made a significant difference to disabled people with higher support needs. This is a black and white photo of a big demonstration by disabled people from all over the UK in Elephant and Castle in London on the 28th of July 1988, demanding independent living for disabled people. In the photograph, protesters are gathered in front of the Elephant and Castle pub, having peaceful discussions among themselves. 1989 brought the formation of two groups which would increase campaigning for independent living. The European Network on Independent Living was formed in Strasbourg when over 80 people from 14 European countries met at the European Parliament. It's still going strong today. The British Council of Disabled People set up their Independent Living Committee, which was tasked with campaigning for direct payment. This is a black and white image of disabled people carrying a banner at a BCODP rally in 1988. The banner features the words, British Council of Organisations of Disabled People. Another setback came in 1992, when a lot of local authorities which had indirect payment schemes closed them after government sent out a circular saying the schemes were illegal. This was a significant blow and led to even more lobbying for a change in the law. Campaigners became aware that the Treasury was blocking the legislation, believing the cost of the scheme would be too high, partly because of an expectation that more disabled people would apply for direct payments. A new tactic was employed, commissioning the Policy Studies Institute to compare the experiences of disabled people employing their own personal assistants with those receiving local authorities' services such as home care. The research, published in 1994, came up with the answers campaigners were expecting. Disabled people employing their own personal assistants were more satisfied than those receiving local authority services. It also showed that direct payments cost 30 to 40% less than local authority services. After all the years of campaigning, the Direct Payments Act finally came into force in 1997, making it legal for local authorities to give disabled people money to employ their own personal assistants. With direct payments, later called individual budgets, the Independent Living Fund, a network of centres for independent living, and disabled people's organisations around the UK, it felt in the late 1990s and early 2000s that disabled people were finally reaching a point where the hard work and campaigning had succeeded. Although this story is focused on the campaign for disabled people to control their own support with personal assistance, it's important to note that disabled people had also been campaigning for accessible housing, transport, environment, and much more. But that is all too much to tell you about here. This is a black and white photograph of a protest by disabled people campaigning for accessible transport at the Buses for All conference in Albert Square, Manchester, on the 16th of June 1995. Disabled people are sitting or standing in front of buses in order to stop them moving. By mid-2010, it was clear again that disabled people's right to independent living was under threat. The Independent Living Fund was closed to new applicants, and a Conservative Liberal Democrat government, which came into power after the May 2010 elections, announced austerity cuts in the money they would give to local authorities. This is an image of the No ILF, No Life logo, featuring a black and white illustration of a wheelchair user holding a placard. This led to renewed campaigning by disabled people in our organisations. In the North West, Greater Manchester Coalition of Disabled People was a leader in the campaign to reopen the Independent Living Fund, lobbying MPs, bringing in support from stars of TV show Coronation Street, campaigning on the streets of Manchester and outside Parliament. This image is from the Save the Independent Living Fund poster from the Save the Independent Living Fund campaign. There are coloured photographs of Coronation Street stars holding up placards in support of disabled people and their families. It bears the slogan, ILF because we're worth it. The other austerity cuts have continued year by year and are passed on as cuts to services, including fewer people having direct payments or individual budgets, reductions in daycare and home care services, and more. Combined with welfare reform, which began in 2008, cutting services for disabled people led to a resurgence of protests such as Direct Action and to the emergence of new disabled people's campaigning organisations. One of the new groups was Disabled People Against Cuts, which was formed following a protest in Birmingham in October 2010. It was a driving force in the campaign to save the Independent Living Fund and has continued to campaign against other cuts. Despite much campaigning, the Independent Living Fund was abolished in 2015 and cuts to individual budgets and other services since then have not been reversed. Here is a colour photograph of a Disabled People Against Cuts protest during the Conservative Party conference Manchester in 2015. Disabled activists are holding up banners and talking to a crowd of protesters while surrounded by police. One of the placards states, "UK government's treatment of disabled is human catastrophe," says United Nations. Disabled people continue to campaign and lobby for improvements, and especially during the current coronavirus pandemic, our organisations are doing all they can to highlight how the suspension of some legislation relating to support for disabled people and even more reductions in services are damaging disabled people's quality of life. This is a colour photograph of disabled activists holding up banners from pro-rogue the Tory party conference protest in Manchester on 30th of September 2019. One of the protesters is wearing a Boris Johnson mask whilst dressed as the Grim Reaper. On one of the banners, the words "Rights Not Charity" are written. Now we've given you a flavour of the history of independent living. Let's hear from some disabled people about what independent living means to them and if the pandemic has changed anything for them. Disabled people, independent living and COVID-19. This film was created during the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 to 2021 by the Nothing About Us Without Us project steering group, working remotely between April 2020 to January 2021. What does independent living mean to you?
So to me, independent living for me personally is the ability to have choice and control over how I live my life. And for me, I guess the really important sides of that are being able to use my home independently, being able to have the support I need to live a decent life, and in particular for me to be able to support my family because I have children.
Independent living means to me living in my own accommodation and being able to decide for myself what I do and the choices that I make, and ultimately being and just having the choice and the freedom to do the same things as anybody else would want to do in their home, and that's the essence of it for me.
What it means to me is that I probably want to go out there and learn to face lifetime struggles on my own, either if it's like paying for my own bills, working out how I'm going to get into my own job, and if I ever want to consider like having a family, and it's going to be tough struggles ahead, and able to pay for a lot of things on my own, and that's what kind of life is like. That's what life is about, just getting things in check.
So to me, independent living means having choice and control over my own life, and also being able to access sort of information that gives me more knowledge on the choice and control over my own life. So for me, sort of personally, what independent living means is having a personal assistant who can help support me to live in my own adapted bungalow with my little dog, and also be able to help me do all the types of girly things that my partner doesn't like doing.
It means to be able to go about my life, interacting with people, being able to work, being able to go to different venues, and being able to actually participate in whether music or theatre or arts, or just going to the pub and being able to participate there, and not to have any whether physical barriers or any other kind of barriers from, say, lighting or signage, and so that I can actually fully participate in society.
I have got disabilities. I've got visual impairment and mental health issues, and I'm because of the nature of how they've presented over the years, particularly the mental health and behavioural, then, complete independence isn't going to happen for me at the moment. But I'm in the process of transitioning to a supported living flat in Wolverhampton, which is independent of my family and giving me a few new contacts and new social opportunities. And that's the plan anyway. Obviously, COVID doesn't help with that. So, yeah, I'm learning a lot of skills in terms of, well, obviously I helped my mum cook before, but things like that. But I'm doing it more independently. I'm having to learn about managing a property, how stressful it can be to phone up the blooming council tax people and do things like that more independently. And I'm, seeing how difficult it can be. But then it can be rewarding when I can do something for myself as well that I haven't perhaps done before.
During COVID-19, what has changed for you?
Since COVID, what the thing that's changed for me in terms of from thinking back to April was the kind of actual coming to terms with COVID and what it meant. And I think everybody had that went through that journey, Gemma, of, well, what does it mean? And what am I going to do about medication or what am I going to do about my shopping? What am I going to do, about all number of things. But I think on the whole, really, Gemma, I've been very, very fortunate because platforms such as Zoom and meetings, Microsoft Meetings and Skype have opened up a really positive, a new virtual world for me, really, because over the last 6 months, I've never met so many different people and spoken to so many different people.
There have been some changes. Most of the changes during this COVID pandemic in 2020 have really been about how my care has been provided. There have been various problems that have gone along with the times, even for those of us who employ our own staff through the personal assistance scheme. So, for example, I had a staff member go AWOL just before lockdown. And then because hiring processes are now different and less safe, I then had to take on a new member of staff in a hurry after weeks with no care. And then that person stole from me. So then they had to be sacked and the police had to become involved. And then I was back looking for staff again. And then now the current staff that I've replaced that one with have been off twice due to COVID scares and coming into contact with people that have then later had positive COVID results. And every time that happens, then I need to stop my staff coming in for 2 weeks to ensure that they're well enough. So for me, the particular difference has just been constant problems with staffing as an individual employer.
I found the placement at the Priory Group during COVID, and so that delayed when I could visit it. And it's meant, well, I probably would have done a gradual transition there anyway, as in, like, when I first started, I was going for 3 days, coming back for 3 days and so forth. And then because the COVID situation has increased again, I was away from the place for a month when Wolverhampton went into lockdown. And then I was back for 2 weeks. And then I was scheduled to come back anyway because it was my birthday on Monday. So I was due to see my family anyway. But then going back, as with last time I went back, I had to have a COVID test, which, wasn't organised perhaps in a timely way. And so I was back a couple of days later than I should have been. And it means also that when I am there, we can't go swimming, we can't go to the shops, like non-essential shops. We can't hang out together necessarily.
Well, literally everything is shut down from every kind of centre that I would normally go to. Community centres I would go to, they're all closed at the moment. You can't go near any of those. But not just that, all kinds of other things have shut down, all kinds of services that I would normally use. whether that be a support group that we'd all meet and just have a coffee and a cake or something and support each other that way, or go into resource centres. All of that is now closed. And of course, socialising, everything's now done via Zoom. I've met very few people in person since March. Only a handful of people I've met in person. So every person I've met is now via Zoom. So it's completely changed everything.
How has this affected choice and control in your life?
Well, it's certainly not doing my health any good. And it just means I haven't got that independence on a day-to-day basis that I would usually have. So even within the limited amount of activity that I can do stuck at home shielding. So, it's meaning that I've only regularly had care cover 2 days a week instead of 7 days a week. The positive side is recruiting each time has been pretty quick, and that's because there's lots of people who suddenly have no work. But the procedures of how we do it have changed, so we can't get the proper criminal records checks that we normally would. I actually have to have by law because I have under 18s living in our home. Actually, we're having to sign a waiver at the moment, which is what can lead then to you taking criminals on as staff. So there's some quite sort of serious implications from that side.
The only problems I've had is actually, so I think when we came into tears a few weeks ago, and they said they were going to bring in these tiers, and on the Blackpool Council website, I went onto the Blackpool Council website, and I was trying to ascertain, could we still could I meet with my mum in our social bubble, because it said things like, well, you mustn't travel unless it's strictly necessary. And one of the things for my mum, and I don't blame her, she was a bit, anxious about us not meeting up because, and being isolated again.
In terms of opportunities, I think my choices are going at a reduced rate, and it's like where do I go from here? Because getting help this way it isn't going to help me, and our people that's just like, are they going to keep acting like this forever? And it's like, because it's like this pandemic. It's like we're all trapped in a cage.
It's affected in some ways in that normally I would obviously meet up in person, and we'd meet up, as I say, I'm heavily involved in the music scene and folks and being an activist. And normally I would participate in many things. So now, strangely, certain things have closed, but other doors have opened. And so there is this weird thing, whereas I can't go to those venues and participate in that kind of music thing. Now I'm talking to people in America, and I'm participating with people with American disability civil rights movement. I'm doing a lot of work there, and I'm doing international artwork and getting my work in festivals and disability prides, where all of that now is online. Whereas previously, access to that kind of thing would have been very difficult. You'd have to travel to them, and it would have been quite costly.
For example, my choice and control of having to go to the bank, for example, or having to go to a doctor, which are sort of essential appointments that I need to sort of follow up. But what I've found when I am sort of out and about, especially with me being a wheelchair user as well, is that people don't recognise the space that they need to give you, especially sort of where I live in Bolton. It seems to be a case that people are either coming to help and just being overly nice, trying to help you out. However, what they don't realise is that I could be at more risk of sort of catching something. So it would be a case of I'd need to keep my distance from them.
How has your support changed during COVID-19?
In terms of how we would envisage the new support package with the Priory Group going, I would have been hoping I could have been going to local groups that I'm actually doing on Zoom. There's one in Wolverhampton which I actually do on Thursday nights. But I could have been meeting them up in person if it weren't for COVID, and supported to access social opportunities like that.
So I started shielding before the first lockdown, and my wife was very lucky to be able to transfer all her work over to home, and is still at home now. So it's October, and so she's been home since early March, as long as I've been at home, which we've been really fortunate about that. And the odd thing is, for me, it's not that unusual to spend periods of time stuck at home due to my health. But what's been odd is that this time everyone's stuck home with me, the whole family, which bizarrely makes it a bit nicer for me than usual. And I hate to say that, because it's sort of it's not really very fortunate for them that they're all kind of stuck here with me.
Because during COVID now, like, I still get the support I get, and obviously granted that it has to be apart, and I'm having to learn on my own Chromebook and getting like other pieces of work done, and like, because it's like in the past, like I used to get like a lot of things done, and because it helps me prioritize. It helps me prioritize a bit, but I don't. But it doesn't really help me internally, because I like that in person like help where it can like show me how to do it, but it's because everything's moved online and it just doesn't seem natural to me.
So there's it's sort of plus and minus, in that the minus, I can't meet the normal support groups I have, the normal friends I have. I can't meet up with them. That's very difficult to do. But I've ended up meeting other groups, which I can now do via Zoom. And now we've got other support groups. So it's a bit of a mixed bag.
So again, like I was saying, I've not managed to sort of see, my family would be sort of the main support line for me, and also my friends would be a main support line for me, because we have been very close for a very long time. So something that's actually stopped in regards to support is I used to go to my grandma's house every Sunday, and we'd have a big family meal where there is up to 11, 12 people there at a time, which means, we can't, with the new rules, especially in Greater Manchester Tier 3, we can't do that meeting anymore. So it's a case of, we're phoning each other over the phone and things like that. And I'm quite lucky in a sense that my mum is a private personal assistant for somebody. So that means she's literally just going to the one person's house and then going back home again. So I have been able to keep that support network with my mum and keep her in sort of a support bubble with me. However, I've found that it's quite different with friends. But what I found with friends is I've actually tried to find different things to do with friends that I wouldn't have done before. So, for example, we attended a drive-in cinema in Trafford one day, and that was fantastic.
Has the pandemic affected or changed people's attitudes towards you?
I've been out very little. It never occurred to me I was going to have to tell you this, Gemma. Right, so the second time I left the house, by the time I was 5 minutes up the road, so we were trying to just go for a walk as a family, and my eldest and I were lagging behind the others because she's a slower walker due to her impairments. And we were even 5 minutes, we were a couple of minutes away from our house, and young people going past us decided that the fact that we were wearing masks was clearly hilarious. And so they started coughing at us on purpose as they went past and laughed at us. So if that's kind of an example of at least one thing that's changed, that's not something somebody would have done before. They wouldn't have been able to threaten me, behave in a threatening way by coughing at me, I guess. And my daughter, I was furious. I was so furious I didn't even know what to say, and in fact went back to look for them, to have a word with them, and couldn't find them, which was probably a good thing, and I went home. But so that's when I've tried to go out in the general public. And so I have not gone out for any walks since then. I have not been able to go to the park with my children at all because it's not safe. So the only times I'm leaving the house at the moment is when I have to see the doctor or my physio, which is very rare. So I think the attitudes are changing towards us. Certainly in my local area, people around here have chosen not to keep themselves to themselves. On my estate, people have very low trust with the government, which I completely support. Unfortunately, it means that they haven't been social distancing. So I live in a hotspot within a whole city that's a hotspot. So the attitudes are definitely changing, and not for the better.
I think a lot of the time people have been okay towards me, but perhaps if I hadn't worn a mask, they would have spoken to me in a different way. I've certainly heard of people who don't wear masks being spoken to rudely, even though they're not wearing masks because of their disabilities. In fact, one of my staff who works at Wolverhampton, she's got asthma, so she's exempt from wearing a mask. And she went to the sandwich shop and they told her to get out because she wasn't wearing a mask. And she said, well, I'm exempt. And they said, well, you still shouldn't be in here. And this was all while she was supporting my friend. So I wasn't there, but I heard about it. And things like that are happening. I mean, luckily, I haven't really been punished for that because I do wear a mask. But in terms of people who don't have any excuse not to wear a mask and just choose not to, because of people like that, disabled people are being punished when they won't wear a mask or follow COVID guidelines another way because they can't because of their needs.
With the mask wearing thing or non-wearing it, I do find that people do struggle to understand. I have found at the beginning of the pandemic, people just didn't get it at all. And it was quite difficult to get across to people having arguments. I've had, as I went into one shop, a lady just screamed at me about wearing a mask in a certain way. And she just presumed that everybody is the same. And she just politely asked me, so do you know you need to wear a mask? And I would have said the reasons why I'm not having one. I think there's a lot of ignorance. So I personally experienced a bit of aggression and ignorance as to why people do or don't wear masks.
I think attitudes are a bit of a strange one to sort of talk about. Like I said before, I've noticed sort of the attitudes on the street where people sort of being overly friendly, overly wanting to help, and sometimes that's not the right thing to be doing. But also I've seen sort of campaigns online, which are sort of, well, not campaigns, more comments from people online talking about how they feel disabled people shouldn't be out in society if they are so vulnerable, which I hate the word vulnerable, but if they're so sort of vulnerable to society, then why are they even going out anyway? Why should they just sort of be locked up? And that's something that's really difficult for disabled people to manage at the moment, with regards to everyone else wanting to get back to normal and the government feeling like, okay, well, we'll just lock disabled people away and they can work from home and they can do this and they can do that, when actually we do want to be engaging with society again the same way everyone else can.
Has anything during the pandemic got better for you?
I'd say my work practices, to be honest. Work practices, it's got me thinking about how I can do things differently and how I can do things more creatively, and how I can, for example, run workshops online for other members to attend, and how I could translate what I would do in person in the office into an online session instead. And actually what I've found with that is it's opening the doors for more people to attend sessions. So currently we have people coming from Blackpool, we have people coming from London, people coming from Wilmslow, people from Warrington. So it means that actually we've had more members attending these sessions and we've had a wider reach of audience than what we did do before. I think that's the way that it's really sort of positively affected me. It's really made me think outside of the box and think about what I can do instead.
Yeah, communicating with people. I've made lots of new friends in this virtual. It's like a different world, really. It's become, I've sort of got like two worlds now. I've got like a virtual network of friends and relationships that I've built up with different people.
Yes, I've managed to meet people via Zoom around the world. And as I say, I'm connecting to people in America. I've formed friendships with people in America. And I even met someone who was a friend of someone who's no longer around. He passed away before the COVID started. And strangely, this individual actually knew this friend. So we have a connection. And this was Keith Armstrong, and the lady I met is called Elaine Cobb. She's a folk singer and a disabled activist. And that was, I'm not sure we would have met if it wasn't for COVID.
So there are some things that have changed for the better during this pandemic. And one of them, for me personally, has been that I have had far greater access to meetings and so on within our activism community, within the disabled people's movement, but actually also access to things outside of it that normally we wouldn't be able to gain access to. Sometimes people aren't that chuffed that we manage it either. So meetings where traditionally we're excluded, we can get an entry when it's just a link online. So that's been massively beneficial. And because for some of us, the access is now a lot worse because people can't attend in person, and that may be their best way to access things. We have had a bit of a gap form, which, and the sort of more positive side of that, because, you know, we'll keep trying to be creative and include as many people as possible, but any situation is never completely accessible. That's why I couldn't access so many meetings before. So what's happened for me now is the amount of meetings I go to has trebled in response to firstly, the need for extra meetings, and secondly, the fact that we have members that cannot access the world as well now as they could before. So we are needing to step up and support those colleagues a little bit right now.
Do you have a message to send to the government about independent living in the future?
I think we need the government to understand that independent living has kept many of us safe during this time when the other alternatives, so for the level of care I need, we'd be starting to look at other kinds of provision that would have been much more dangerous. So agency care would have been more dangerous during this time. Institutional care would be more dangerous during this time. And we can see that with the death figures that our whole community has faced. Whereas the early research is looking like those of us in independent living who've been able to do what I've done, which is stay home, stay safe, and actually have that choice. And then also at the same time to be able to find ways to still access life and living, because it's not enough just to survive. You know, we need the opportunity to keep thriving. And I think for me, I've had still, even despite all of this, I've had opportunities to carry on thriving as an activist. And I think that the hard side of that is that not everyone can. I think government really needs to not just create an emergency review about how they're doing things at the moment in social care, but also as soon as possible create a long-term strategy that completely overhauls that whole system, because we knew it was vulnerable already. It already was a hotbed of infections and infestations, so much abuse and so much impingement of human rights, and that there are better ways to do this with the same money. And I would really, really like government to allow disabled people ourselves to redesign that whole system drastically.
Right now in the world, like, not a lot of things can be happening, because I know, like, independent living is supposed to be like getting out and like, because like if you want to be like living with a group of mates, obviously that's a communal setting, and obviously because of the pandemic can't be risked because you'll be risking exposure. So until in the near future, when hopefully when more people like stop lying to us and actually like show like the right way of life, and there is something promising at the end of the tunnel, then we can definitely get that our own rights to independent way of life back. And then, but obviously, yes, and that's just me saying that whatever future it will be, providing if governments don't go back on their own say-sos, it'll be promising. We just gotta keep fighting for it because, and I said this before, because opposition deserves to be resisted.
Well, to me, what I think this means for the future of independent living is that, well, basically thinking about the whole sort of package of independent living compared to people living in residential homes or supported living or something like that, for example. What we found is that people who are living independently have actually fared a lot better during the pandemic than those who are living in care homes or residential homes or support homes or whatever else there is out there, ICU units. We found that, that the infection control is much more up to scratch when you're able to live at home rather than sort of living in an institution or something like that. So part of the sort of choice and control that I have is I've been able to purchase a lot of PPE with my direct payments budget so that I can make sure that I'm safe in the house.
I think they need to take, obviously, disability a lot more serious than they do, and not be so dismissive of disabled people's concerns. They tend to not see it as a big deal. Some of the statements I've seen from Conservative MPs are really annoying and heartbreaking, and they don't seem to care what happens to any disabled person. I kind of think having the separate act, the DDA being a separate act, might actually strengthen the act and put more teeth in the act. And then it actually might do a lot more good. It would help also if, I guess, if MPs actually communicated with the organisations who represent disabled people, and those people sat on committee when making decisions about disabled people. And that would actually help a great deal, because that's part of the problem. If you're not inside the actual discussions and the decision making, it's very difficult to influence anything.
Polite messages to the government, I might need to think. I have quite a lot of impolite messages for them, but I would like to say that they've got to make reasonable adjustments. They would if it was their own family members. I've noticed it is very sad, actually, that my mum's, and so mine when I'm here, local MP's wife has committed suicide in June, and now this guy, Owen Paterson, he's raising awareness of mental health issues. And as a Conservative minister, that's not something you'd expect to hear from him. And perhaps it does take things like that, tragedies, to happen to force people to take action. The government have got to realise this isn't about them. It's not about money and business. What use will be the economy if we're all dead?
The care sector, the government, central government, local government, the local authorities, the councils as well, they all need to get some form of working party, and they need to bring about a change in legislation about how people are, how people are looked after, about how disabled people are supported. Because the thing is, we're all born in this world. We're all born, and some people have families, but some people are on their own. But I think as human beings, everybody needs some form, and they deserve some form of support in life, and they deserve as much. Say that I was on my own and didn't have any family or friends. I would like to think I deserve as much dignity and as much someone to say to me, "Oh, hi Dean, how are you today?" Even if someone and I think that's the thing. But also in terms of people's, if they're living in a care home or living in supported, living or sheltered accommodation, they need to get over the rules are too confusing. They need to have, they need to work with people, the government, all these organisations, these people in authority, they need to work with people. Nothing about us as disabled people without us being involved.
This film has been produced by the People's History Museum's Nothing About Us Without Us project. It is also available as 3 separate films. 1. The 7 Needs of Independent Living. 2. The History of Independent Living in the United Kingdom. 3. Disabled People's Experiences of Independent Living in the Context of COVID-19. If you would like to watch any of these films, they are available to watch for free on the People's History Museum website. This film was created by the Nothing About Us Without Us project steering group. Images: People's History Museum, Disabled People's Archive, Greater Manchester Coalition of Disabled People. Illustrations: Brian Hilton. BSL Interpretation, V Limited.